And for the students that are logged on, I see some chats are happening through the Q&A. So we're going to try to keep the Q&A feature just for questions. Okay, so let's not use it as a chat. I've turned off the chat. Students at home, the reason you can't see each other is because this is a webinar. So with 500 students at Los Cerros all on at the same time, it would get pretty crazy if we all had our cameras on. So you guys at home will be able to watch. We'll be able to sort of take attendance at the end because it'll give me a report of who was here. Other than that, I'm going to turn it over to Miss Carter and turn my camera off, and we're super excited.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Briggs. And just to introduce our wonderful author today, David Levithan. We're so excited to host you. And this is, for me, a true fangirl moment because not just as a librarian, but as a reader and a liver and lover of stories. You may know him for some of my all-time favorite reads, but we like Every Day, Another Day, Someday. And he has a new novel out, The Mysterious Disappearance of Aiden Ness. He's also co-authored some of our most beloved stories, like our latest Netflix series, Dash and Lily, Will Grayson, Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist. But just like Mr. Briggs said, for the students that are on here, use the Q&A to write your questions as we listen, and we'll have some time to go through those at the end. But without further ado, Mr. Levithan, take it away.
Awesome. I am going to ask, so how much time do we have total, just so I know to pace myself?
We have budgeted until 11 o'clock.
Perfect. All right. So, hello, it's so great to be here, even though I'm not actually any place different than my house, but it's great to actually be with you and sharing a Zoom with you if I can't be there in person. And I'm so excited to be talking to you about The Mysterious Disappearance of Aiden Ness as told to his brother. Now, I'm going to warn you ahead of time. There are lots of twists and turns, that there's a reason it's called A Mysterious Disappearance. So I'm going to try to avoid spoilers. I'm trying not to give anything away. I will also say that I'll talk for a little bit, but really my favorite thing is to answer questions. So I will definitely want to answer your questions. So please keep putting them in the Q&A, and we'll leave lots of time so I can answer any questions you have about this book, about being a writer, about having Netflix shows based on your books, whatever you want to talk about, I am game. Now, a little bit about myself, because I have sort of a double life in publishing. Ordinarily, if this were during the day, I would actually be in my office. We're working from home now, but my office is at Scholastic. So even though I'm a writer, for one part of my life, my day job is working as an editor at Scholastic, and I work on everything from books in the Babysitter's Club series to books in the Hunger Games series. So a lot of different series. So I basically work with other people's books during the day, and then on the weekends and at nights, I write my own books. So I'll tell you a little bit about this book. So it's called The Mysterious Disappearance of Aiden Ness. So already, as told to his brother, so already you know a few things from the very, 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 very long title. You know that somebody has disappeared mysteriously. You know that person's name is Aiden Ness, and as told to his brother, you know that the book isn't necessarily told from Aiden Ness's point of view, and that is correct. So I'll give you a little bit. I will not give too much away, I promise. But so the story is told by Lucas, who is 11 years old and who has an older brother named, you guessed it, Aiden. He's a year older. They share a bedroom. They see each other all the time because of that. They don't have, they think, many mysteries between them. But one day, Aiden disappears. That at first, in the middle of the night, and that Lucas wakes up, his brother's not there. He thinks it's strange. Then he tells his parents. They think it's strange. They look all around the house. They can't find Aiden. They look for a note. There's no note. And then suddenly they get more alarmed, and so they're calling all of Aiden's friends. They look at the school. They look all around the town. Nobody can find where Aiden has gone. The police are called. They start to do a search. Nobody can find this boy. And they feel either he ran very far away or was taken. They just don't know what happened to him. And for 6 days, it's like this. Lucas is in the house. His parents are obviously freaking out. Everybody is freaking out because Aiden cannot be found. And then on the 6th night, Lucas is in their room. All the adults are downstairs, and Lucas hears a noise up in the attic. And he thinks, well, it might be squirrels, it might be, who knows what it might be, but because you can't really get to the attic without passing the bedroom or downstairs, he doesn't think anybody's up there. But he goes upstairs and finds Aiden lying face down in front of an open cupboard, and he has a very strange blue leaf in his hair. And so, obviously, as you would be, Lucas is very confused. What's Aiden doing here? Aiden looks very confused about why he's there. And it's not giving anything away because it's the end of the first chapter to say that what ends up happening is when Lucas asks Aiden, what happened? Where were you? Aiden's answer is that he was in a fantasy world, that he went somewhere else for these 6 days and now has come back. And that is his story about why he left. Now, nobody believes him, and Lucas doesn't necessarily believe him. Aiden's been known to make up stories and to lie about things, and this just seems like another lie, but what if it's true? And so the book is about Lucas trying to figure out what actually happened to Aiden. Did he really go into another world, or did something else happen to him, and Aiden is making up this story about a fantasy world to cover for what really happened? So it is a mystery. It may or may not be a fantasy, and very much it's a story about brothers and trying to figure out the truth for when somebody in your family tells you something. So that's what the book is about. And good, I'm already seeing there are plenty of questions there. I can tell this is a good school with so many questions so early on. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my writing process, if that sounds good. And then just sort of open it up to you guys, because my writing process, I work with lots of different authors, and I have to tell you, every writer does it a different way. So I'll tell you my way, but it might not be the right way for you, or it certainly wouldn't be for some of the other writers I work with. But for me, I dive right into a story, and I basically write the story to find out what happened. I am what we call a pantser. That doesn't mean that I wear pants. I do wear pants, but pantser means that I'm going by the seat of my pants, which means that you are just going forward and not planning it out, not writing an outline, seeing what the story is. And so in this particular case, I started off with basically the question that Lucas has of, if your brother disappeared and came back and said, while I was gone, I was in a fantasy world. So I was in Narnia or Oz. What would you do? Would you believe him? Would you not believe him? What kind of proof would you need in order to believe him? And so I wrote the whole book with everybody reacting to Aiden, and also Aiden reacting to being back from wherever he was, trying to find out the answer to that question. A lot of people have asked me, so did you know the answer? Did you know whether Aiden is telling the truth or not as he wrote the book? And the answer is no, I didn't. I actually wrote the book because I was writing it from Lucas's point of view. I didn't want to know the truth until Lucas, the character, found out the truth. So for me, the book is very much, I went on the same journey as a writer that the reader goes on, because hopefully as you as a reader are reading it going, is this true? Is this not true? I don't know how I feel about this. That's exactly how I was feeling while I was writing it. So that was really fun to me. And in my writing, again, I love to just make things up as I go along. That is the joy of writing to me, is that I can just create things. And certainly in writing about the fantasy world that may or may not be true, it was very fun as a writer to do that. If I want there to be a green sky, all I have to do is type in, there was a green sky. If I want to say that everybody ate a certain food, I can just type in, and I can create a world just with words, which is a really fun thing to do as an author, and not something that I've done as much before in my other books. So that's how I write alone. And then when I write books with other people, I go back and forth with them, and we make it up together as we go along. So that is roughly the backstory here. I know, do you have other questions? Or?
Yeah, so I'll kind of go through the Q&A.
Right.
And I, of course, have my own set of questions.
Excellent.
I will give it to the students first before I jump in. But just kind of kicking it off, what was your favorite book you wrote?
Oh, I will say that my favorite book probably is the first collaboration I did, which is called Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist. It was turned into a movie. I'm getting a thumbs up, which I appreciate. And that was because Rachel Cohn, who I wrote the book with and have written 5 other books with since then, she and I, we had no idea what we were doing. She was like, I want to write a book about a boy and a girl named Nick and Nora. They're in New York City for one night and lots of things happen. And I was like, okay. And then she was like, go write the first chapter, David. So I sat down, I was like, okay, Nick. And I imagined him being a bass player in a rock and roll band and looking out and seeing his ex-girlfriend in the audience and asking a girl named Nora to be his girlfriend for 5 minutes just so he wouldn't be embarrassed in front of his ex. And Rachel and I didn't talk about it. I just finished my chapter. I emailed it to her, and then I waited to see what the next part of the story would be. And then she emailed me back, and there was chapter 2, and I got to meet Nora, and we went back and forth. And it's my favorite because we just didn't know what we were doing at all. We were literally playing with each other by sending chapters back and forth. But I so enjoyed doing that, that it was one of the best experiences I've had as a writer. So that one always in my heart. It might not be the best book I've ever written, but it's
I'd have to follow up with that one. How involved were you and Rachel in the production of that movie when it turned into the screenplay?
Rachel and I have been extremely lucky because we have really loved and gotten to choose the directors and the producers for our movies, and then we just basically became friends with them. And I was very lucky. I live and work in New York, and so they filmed in New York. So basically, we would just go to the set. Like, I would work would end. I would leave my office and I would just walk over to wherever they were filming and would just hang out there. And that happened with Nick and Nora, and it happened with Dash and Lily. And luckily, they so understood the book, and everything they did was so in the spirit of the book. It wasn't like we had to like say, oh, no, that doesn't happen, or oh, no, that's wrong. We just sat there and we're like, wow, our book is coming to life, and this is pretty cool. So it was just a great experience. That's
awesome. Someone wanted to know, we use Google Docs here. So someone wanted to know, what do you use? What programs do you use to like write your books?
I'm basically a Microsoft Word person, which sounds like I write on a typewriter. That's like the equivalent, right? But I've done a couple of collaborations on Google Docs. My friend Nina LaCour and I wrote a book together called You Know Me Well that came out 5 years ago, and they're doing a special edition of it that's coming out this summer. And they wanted us to write a new short story, and she and I both got on Google Docs and basically wrote the story on Google Docs, going back and forth almost in real time, which was fun. But for me, for the solo books, I just sit down with Microsoft Word and I write on there, and I rewrite and I polish it up and then email it to my editor when I'm done.
Awesome. We have another question. Do you ever have writing blocks? And if so, how do you get over them?
That is a great question, and it certainly comes up a lot. And the answer is, of course. There are definitely moments, especially when you're somebody who makes it up as he goes along. There are times where you're like, I have no idea what's going to happen next. And that's the time to stop for the day. So basically what I do, there are many different strategies I have for writer's block, and I suggest. And again, because I'm an editor who works with other writers, I'm often talking to them about their writer's block and what they can do. I mean, the first thing always is to go do something else that doesn't really have anything to do with the book. Go take a walk, or take a shower if you haven't taken a shower. To just do something where your mind isn't in the book. And sometimes your mind just needs that break. And then when you come back to it, it's like, oh, okay, it's done a little work in the back of your mind. And when you sit down again, the answer is there. A second thing, which I always recommend, is talk it over with somebody else, because when you talk about a book, it's a very, very different part of your brain than when you're writing the book. So, and sometimes I do it with friends who know what I'm writing, and sometimes I do it with friends who don't know what I'm writing, so they can ask me questions. So I will say to them, all right, so I'm having Lucas, he is about to go up to the attic to find his brother. I'm not sure what he's going to find. And then a friend might just say, well, is Aiden up there? And I'd be like, well, yes, Aiden's definitely up there. And then they might ask, well, if Aiden's up there, what is he sitting down? Is he lying down? Is he standing up? Like what? And like by asking those questions and having to answer them, suddenly I'm like, oh wait, I actually do know what's going on next. So that helps a lot too. And then the third thing is I never try to force anything. That if I'm blocked on one story, I will just stop that story and I will start working on a different story. And again, usually I will come back to the original one. It could be a week later, it could be a year later. The book, I just finished another middle grade book, and literally I wrote the first chapter 4 years ago. I had no idea where it was going, and I put it down, left it on my computer, and then in October, I was going through my computer files and I opened up a file and I was like, what's this folder? And there was the first chapter, and suddenly I knew what the story was. So it always helps to go other places. So all of these things, like take a break, talk it over, or start something else and come back to it later and see if you know more about it later.
And then follow up again. What books do you have going at any given time? It sounds like you have some things happening always.
I mean, usually what ends up happening is I will have, when it's time for the next book, usually there'll be like 2 or 3 contenders. So I will write a few sentences on this one, I'll write a few sentences on that one. But then once I know which one really is going to be the next book, I put the other ones aside and really focus on one at a time. I can do a collaboration and a solo book at the same time, because obviously with the collaboration, I only have it half the time. So I can work on my own stuff while the other writer is writing their chapter. But that's about as much as I can do, because when I fall into a story, I really fall into the story, and I can't really leave it to visit other stories while I'm there.
Which is a good follow-up question from the Q&A. How long does it take to make a book?
Oh, it depends on the book. For me, usually it takes about a year, especially a book like Mysterious Disappearance. You see, it's not that long, and it just sort of, once it started, it just kept going. And the actual writing time in that year might only be 6 months, and then I will take another 6 months to get it right, to revise, to keep rereading it, take time off from it and come back to it to see it with fairly new eyes. But usually from start to finish, it's about a year, but that can change. I've had books that I've written in probably 3 months because they were just there and they were really quick. And then other books took me 3 years because I just didn't know what was next. I put it down for 6 months, I came back to it, and I just needed a longer process. So the book will tell you how long it needs to take. Usually you can't impose your own timetable on the book.
Awesome. Let's, an anonymous question. What is some advice you would give to some people who are inspired to be an author?
Oh, I mean, just write and write and write and write and write some more. I think that I got to be a writer because I was just dedicated to writing things sheerly for the joy of it and to have my friends read it. I never thought, oh, I'm going to be a published author right away. Oh, I'm going to start writing a book and it has to be published at a certain time. I literally started writing mostly for my friends, and I wrote short stories for them. Sometimes I wrote a poem for them. And they were the only audience, but that was good because they would give me feedback. I'd see what they liked, I'd see what they didn't like, and then I'd write something else for them and try to be more the things that were liked or that I was successful at, and less of the things I failed at. But I tried so many different things. And I always say this when I'm talking to schools, because as a student, I loved just jumping into whatever I loved at that moment. And it's very funny, if you look at the things that I wrote when I was in grade school and in middle school and in high school, you almost can tell exactly what I was reading at that point. Because if I started reading British mysteries, I totally started writing a British mystery. Now, had I ever been to Britain? No. Did I really know how to plot a mystery? Not really. But I loved the story so much. I was like, I'm going to try this. I tried a lot of action adventure because I loved action adventure. And then I would love a science fiction thing. So I'd try to write something about an alien. And I learned my own style, and I learned what I wanted to write by trying lots of different things. And so that's also advice I say all the time to writers, that you should just try writing all different kinds of things. Don't think of yourself as one type of writer, or that you like one type of story. Like, you can write a love story one day, and you can write something about like bloodthirsty unicorns the next day, and then you can write a British mystery the next day. Like, you have, your imagination is the only limit you have, and imagination is pretty limitless. So just go for it, and just make sure that you know that no one else has to read it until you're ready for them to read it. I think a lot of people get very self-conscious about their writing, or they think, oh, it's bad, or oh, I'm failing at it. But the great thing about writing is that it's only yours. You are the only person who's in charge of it. That nobody else ever has to read it until you choose to let them in and read it. And so give yourself the opportunity to fail a lot in order to find the things that you're good at. And then when you find things that you're proud of and are good at, then start to share it. And again, I would start with your friends. And then once you do that, you can start sharing it with a wider and wider audience.
Just a follow-up, kind of based on what you were talking about, what got you started in the like YA realm, I guess, to begin with?
Well, it was, I mean, I started at Scholastic when I was 19 as an intern, which was very young. I know it seems very old to some people on this call, but that's young to start a job. And I just loved, again, working on all the books that I worked on, and I specifically loved the YA stuff. And for my first book, Boy Meets Boy, I basically, as an editor, was really looking for happy romantic books with gay characters in them. And at that time, and this was back in 2000, and at that time it was 2002, the book came out in 2003, there weren't that many. And so I was like, you know what? If there's the great Toni Morrison quote that if there's a book you want to read and it's not there, you should write it. And so I very much wrote a book that I wanted to see out in the world, and then it was out in the world. And luckily, other writers were doing the same, and suddenly there were lots of books about LGBTQIA plus kids in YA. But that's what got me into it, was sort of seeing a voice that wasn't there, realizing I could be that voice, and then writing the book that was in that voice. And that's, my whole career followed that.
And you do it well.
Well, thank you.
One of the biggest questions I had, I feel like anytime I read your books, I'm transported into my teenage self, and you're able to really capture like the roller coaster of emotions and just people's identities that they're going, things that they're going through, and it really like catapults you. I feel like you're so attuned to writing, writing in that genre too. And I will stop asking my questions. Sydney wanted to know, and it sounds like you did, but Sydney wants to know, did you like writing when you were younger?
Yeah, I loved writing when I was younger. And it's interesting, again, I want to put it in some context that, again, I work with lots of other authors, and for everyone like me who was like, yep, in third grade, I knew I wanted to be a writer, I know other writers who didn't know until college or after college that they wanted to be writers. So it can happen at any time. But for me, yeah, I was lucky that I had a lot of teachers who loved to ask us to write stories. And especially in third grade, they would ask us to write stories. And I loved writing chase scenes, which again, if you read my books, there aren't that many chase scenes in the books that I ended up writing. But in third grade, I loved chase scenes. And I always tell the story how there was one short story, I still remember it, where it was a chase scene across a hotel lobby. And I said that the character scampered through the hotel lobby. And I was just so proud of that word. I thought, you know what? I could have said run. I could have said rushed through the hotel lobby. I could have said jumped through the hotel lobby, but I said scampered. And the fact that I was so proud of that word, and I'm sure the teacher circled that word and said good word, but that's, I always say, when I knew that I wanted to be a writer, when I actually got a sense of pleasure and accomplishment from finding the exact right word for the exact right moment. Everything I've done since then has sort of sprung from that. So I did, but again, I will emphasize, I always wrote for my friends and for myself. It wasn't until I was well into college and then after college that I started to actually let strangers read my books.
Awesome. Another great question. What keeps you motivated to write?
Oh, that is a great question. I mean, I think right now, I mean, it works on two levels. I mean, the fact that people have liked my book so far, the fact that I know that there are people who look forward to the next book I write, that does inspire me. Anytime somebody sends me a Facebook message or sends an email or writes a comment saying like, oh, I really loved your book, or your book meant a lot to me, that just like goes straight into my like inspiration bank, and I can pull it out whenever I need it most to be inspired, knowing that books can change how people see the world or see themselves. And that just means a lot to me. And for me in particular, also, again, as I was talking about Boy Meets Boy, I do love writing about LGBTQIA plus stories. I still think there need to be more of them out into the world. And so that also is part of my mission for why I do what I do, which is, again, that if you want your voice to be out there and you want your own identity to be represented, you can be that representative. You don't have to be. But for me, I like being that representative and getting those queer voices out there. So that's definitely a part of it too. And then finally, I will say, which with this book, Mysterious Disappearance of Aydah and Ness, it's also very much about all the books that I loved when I was in 5th and 6th grade, like books like From the Mixed Up Files of Miss Baisley Frankweiler, Narnia, obviously, Wrinkle in Time, The Westing Game. I was writing in a way to say thank you to the books that had meant a lot to me as a kid. And that's also motivating to know that you are contributing to something that was really important to you. And in a way, that's the best way you can say thank you to an author, is to become an author and write your books that are inspired by them. And that's a lot of what I do right now.
So I know you co-author a lot with, it sounds like, Rachel Kahn for Ages. Will Grayson was one of my most favorite books of all time. How was it co-writing with John Green?
Oh, it was fantastic writing with John. And we did it a little differently. Usually when I write with somebody like Rachel, we go back and forth. So I wrote chapter 1, Rachel wrote chapter 2, me 3, and back and forth. But with John, we did it a little differently. For those of you who don't know the book, it's called Will Grayson, because it is about 2 boys who happen to have the same name, Will Grayson, and somehow their lives intersect. They cross paths and their lives become enmeshed with each other. But so in this, at the beginning, they don't know each other. They don't have anybody in common. They're living in different suburbs of Chicago. So we didn't actually have to go back and forth because our Will Graysons had different stories. So John and I actually wrote our first chapters at the same time and then read them aloud to each other. and then wrote our second chapters at the same time and then read them aloud, which was very different because I couldn't, basically what was happening with his Will Grayson was happening somewhere else. It couldn't come into my story until our characters met. So it was really fun to sort of be like, okay, I'm going to use that character eventually. And then obviously halfway through the book when they did meet, suddenly we were going back and forth and we were very much in each other's business. But we had a blast. And there's one character in that book, Tiny Cooper, who appears basically in the first paragraph of John's first chapter, who I could not wait. And he steals the book. He is a very large, very gay guy who is writing a musical based on his own life. And so Don and I basically, even though we were writing our Will Graysons, Tiny Cooper was the one who stole the show. And we had a blast bouncing that character back and forth.
Agreed. It was great reading that too. A question, and I think I'm just going to reword it a little bit, but the question is, how is traditional publishing, or like, I guess, what is the process of publishing your books?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, obviously it's something I am very aware of because of my day job. Basically how it works is that for me, I write something, usually I write the whole thing. So again, the book that I just finished, when I'm done with it, I will send it to my agent, who then sends it to my publisher. Hopefully they are like, we like this book, we want to publish it. Once they make a deal, it goes to my editor. And my editor is the most important person in my publishing career. I would be lost without her. And luckily I've had the same editor now pretty much since my first book. And what she will do is very similar to the way a teacher will grade your paper. She will go through the story and she will point out the things that need improvement. She'll point out the things that are great, the equivalent of circling that word and saying great word. She will do that for me. She will take the role of the reader and say, David, this makes no sense, or David, I don't understand why this character is doing this at this moment, and we'll have conversations about it. And basically, once she gives me her comments, I will go back and it'll take me a month or two to revise the book and address her comments, do other changes that I want to make. Then I'll hand it back to her. She will give it to a copy editor, who is the person who like looks at all the grammar, make sure all the periods are there, make sure everything is factually correct. So if I say that a meteor happened in 2002, they will look it up and make sure it really happened in 2002 and not 2001 or 2003. And so then I'll get it back and I will look at all those changes to make. And then after that, basically my job is done, and they will send it to a printer and typeset it. And at the same time, the art director is working on a cover. For this cover, they sent me a lot of different options. And I loved this option, which with the paper airplane and the houses, it really, really matched the book perfectly. So we'll have a conversation about that. And then the cover will be done. And then again, it takes about, from the time we sort of agree to everything is done, it's been about 5 or 6 months until it actually hits the shelves, because they have to print the book, they have to go to the bookstores, like the wonderful Rakestraw that has made this all possible for us today, to make sure that the stores buy in their copies to have in the stores, and then the book will come out.
And then is it unusual or usual to have the same editor throughout your writing career, I guess, since you've been at Scholastic, but or do people kind of switch around?
I mean, it depends. I'm lucky in that my editor basically stayed at the same publishing house the whole time. But some editors move around, and if I'm working at Random House and my Random House editor leaves for Simon & Schuster, I do not therefore leave with her. I would get a new editor at Random House. So most authors have had more than one editor. It's rare to go for 20 years with only one editor, but if you are staying in the same place and your editor stays in the same place, usually you do try to do that. And I have, as an editor, some authors. Again, Anne Martin was the first author I ever worked with, the author of the Babysitters Club, when I started almost 30 years ago, and she and I are still working together. So sometimes it works.
That's great. A specific question about the book Every Day. So Every Day is a favorite book for me. How difficult was it to slip in and out of so many different characters?
It's a great question. For those of you who do not know the book, Every Day is about a character named A who every day wakes up in the body and the life of a different person. It's always been this way. So A has never had a body of their own. And so the book follows A basically waking up around age 16 and basically falling in love with a girl named Rhiannon and having to figure out how do you actually have a relationship? Can you have a relationship if you are changing every day? And it was hard to get into the mind of somebody whose body changes every day, because that's not based on my own experience. This body has been mine for as long as I can remember. But at the same time, it was really interesting for me because I had to ask myself these questions of what defines you if not your body? If you changed every day, what kind of person would you be? We always say, oh, there's the person inside. So this was literally the person inside. And so to write from their point of view, I really had to think about what would your life be like if you weren't defined by what you looked like, by race, parents, gender, any of these things that usually define us. And it was actually very freeing to write a character who didn't actually have to be defined by those things and could just be themselves. And very much the book is about sort of who you are when you get to define yourself. But it was crazy, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, I don't outline books. And so every chapter of that book and someday the sequel, A wakes up in a different body and a different life. And literally I would finish a chapter, I would insert a page break, I'd start a new chapter. And within that minute of starting a new chapter, I had just decided that moment who A was. And sometimes I was very surprised by what I came up with. But I would just have to run with it, because once I started writing, I was like, okay, if A is waking up in the body of somebody who's in the hospital and can't leave, that's the chapter that I had to write. So it was a great challenge as an author, but it was also fun because, again, I got to discover all these new things about a character who wasn't defined by how they look.
So freeing.
Yeah.
Hazel has a question, and this question has come up a few other times. So how does it feel to have books that you have written that got turned into a movie or TV show and see them come to life on film?
That's a great question. Thank you, Hazel. I've been really lucky because I really love all of the shows that have and movies that have been made from my books. So I'm very lucky. When I'm writing, don't picture things in my head. So when they adapt it, I'm like, oh, I guess that's what it looks like. That's cool. Rachel, who I write many of my books with, she actually does picture it. So she actually had a harder time because she would have the movie in her head, and then they would make the movie and she'd be like, wait, that's not the way it looks in my head, because there's no way to really download what's in her head. So it was a little harder for her to adjust. But I've loved it, especially Dash and Lily, which came out on Netflix. Because it was a TV show, they had more time. They had 8 episodes instead of just one movie to really get to know the characters and to show the world of the characters. And they did such a great job with it. It was amazing. I mean, there is this moment where you're sitting there and you're like, everything that I'm seeing right now was in my head at one point. And it's very weird when you're walking on a set to be like because again, especially a movie, there are hundreds of people around, and you're like, all of these people are here because of literally words I put on a page. And this actor is now going to have to jump out of a window because I said that character jumped out of the window. So it's very strange, but it's very wonderful if they, again, are true to the book. And I've been lucky because everything I've had that's been adapted has been true to the book. So I've loved it.
Yeah, that must be. Another question, which one was I going to pull? This is from an anonymous question writer. What was your hardest scene in a book to write?
Oh, wow. I mean, it's usually the really tough and emotional scenes that are the hardest ones to write. And I've been thinking about it a lot lately with the 20th anniversary coming up. I wrote a book called Love is the Higher Law, which is about 9/11 and about everything that happened in New York on 9/11 and in the days and months after it. And that was easily the hardest. That makes sense, but you know what I mean. It was the hardest book that I've ever had to write, because I was writing about something both that was very, very tragic, but also I was writing about something that meant a lot to a lot of other people. And I wanted to be very respectful of all of those people and what they had been through. The book is loosely based on my observations and what I felt, because I was in New York on 9/11 and watched the towers fall. But so it was hard for me to go back there and write about it because it was such a horrible thing. But it was also hard because, again, I knew that other people felt just as strongly and emotionally about it, and I just wanted to get it right. So I think that those are the hardest scenes, when you're talking about something difficult that you know will mean a lot to people. You just want to get every single detail, every single word as perfect as you can get, because it means so much.
Awesome. And getting into another question, this is about Dash and Lily. Where did the inspiration for the Dash and Lily storyline come?
So when Rachel and I start a book, we usually have a very, very, very small premise. So as I said, for Nick and Nora, it was like boy and a girl in New York one night. That was all we knew. For Dash and Lily, what we wanted basically was our one line was cat and mouse chase around New York City. We wanted it to be a boy and a girl who keep missing each other and not meeting up and are basically chasing after each other. Oh, I guess I did have a chase scene after all. But who are not, it's not a love story where they meet at the beginning and you're following them through. It's a love story where they are just keep not meeting each other. And that was the inspiration. And again, that can be, you could send them anywhere in New York City with that. So that was the fun of the book, was I started the book with Dash finding a red notebook in the Strand, which is the same in the Netflix series, with a bunch of clues. He has no idea who left the notebook. He has no idea what her life is like. And then he returns the notebook with another set of clues for somewhere else she has to go. And that notebook gets passed back and forth. And just like the characters had no idea where they'd be sent next, I would send my chapter to Rachel, and I would have no idea where she was going to send me next. So I'd get a chapter back from her and be like, oh, I guess they're at a toy store, they're at F.O. Schwartz, or oh, I guess they are going to go see the Christmas tree. It was very much us following the lead of the characters, which was really fun.
That's really cool and different, because a lot of times you hear like people, like I have it all written out,
Right.
outline start to finish. So that's nice to hear there's all different ways to write. This question has come up a bunch, but a lot of students want to know how many books you've written.
And I should know that I'm gonna say 26. I could be wrong. There have been a lot, because I mean, then 26 includes books I've written with other people. Solo books, it's probably only about 15 or so. But yeah, I think I'm at 26. I think that's what Mysterious Disappearance was.
Woohoo. Aydah wants to know who designs the cover, and I know it sounds like you get a lot of submission for covers, but how do you land on it, or is it through the publishing company?
Yes, it's the publisher who's in charge of putting the cover together. And so basically what happens is the author hands in the book to the editor. Then the editor usually passes the book to the designer and says, here's the book. If they have some ideas, they might say, oh, I think maybe I want it to be an illustrated cover. Or, oh, maybe it should be a photograph of this character. But the designer usually reads the book, comes up with concepts of their own, and then proposes them to the editor and to other people at the publisher, and then ultimately to the author. So again, for this book, they were like, well, we decided the title is Disappearance, so we're not going to show any of the characters on the cover. We want it to be mysterious. And then we're going to have it be in the town, but we want this one maybe magical element of sort of the paper airplane. Where is it coming from? And so they talk it over, and then once they've decided on a concept, they will approach an artist and they will say, here's our concept, here's what we'd like you to do. And then you just see what the artist does. Usually the artist will do a sketch, and everybody, the author, the editor, the designer, will all look at the sketch to make sure it feels right. And then if everybody approves the sketch, they'll paint the final art or take the final photographs. And that's where the final cover comes from. So it's a process, and the author is sort of a spectator mostly to that process, but it usually works because, again, everybody's read the book, they know the story, they want something that feels right for the book.
Yeah, and draw someone to open it up.
Yeah.
Another question that has come up ways. How do you keep focus when you are like in your writing process? Do you need no sound, silence, and are you writing long stretches of time?
Again, it's a great question. And again, I will say every author is different. So my answer is just the right answer for me. It might not be the right answer for you, but for me, there is always music playing. Like that is how I get into the zone of a book. Is there's a constant soundtrack on my iTunes blasting. So instead of keeping very silent to keep everything out, I actually make everything really loud to keep everything else out. And yes, I will then just sit down and write. Usually I will write for a few hours at a stretch. Like I won't do it a little bit at a time. I will do long parts. I also always try to end a little bit before the end of where I know the story is going. So if I can see to the end of the chapter, but I don't know what the next chapter is, I will actually stop before the end of the chapter so that when I start again, I'll at least have one little thing that I know, and hopefully that will lead to other things that I know. But that is it. And I mostly work at home. A lot of my friends write in coffee shops, or at least they did before the pandemic. But if there are other people around, I'm way too easily distracted. I'll just stare at other people and be writing stories about them in my head and not the stories of the characters I'm supposed to be writing about. So most of the time I do it by myself or with other friends in their houses who are also writing. So we're all really, really focused. But that's what works for me.
Hunker down, I can identify.
Yeah.
There have been a couple students writing in that they're in the middle of their own writing process or writing a book. And if there's any tips that you can give them.
I mean, again, I think it is just keep going, even if it doesn't feel right all the time, or even if you think you're not doing, like it's not perfect. No first draft is ever perfect. Let yourself write the messy, unwieldy first draft that has chapters that don't actually tie into the main plot, or there are 12 endings and you're not sure which one is the right one, so you wrote them all. You have characters who suddenly appear and you're like, I have no idea who this character is. Just let yourself do it. Let the first draft be messy. The important thing is to get to the end so that you can then go back, now that you know what the story is, and revise it and reread it to make it take its shape. I think a lot of people, because we read finished books all the time, we don't know how messy they were before they were in sort of printed fashion. I think you set yourself a way too high standard to think that it's going to be perfect or even very good in the first draft. The first draft really isn't meant to be very good, and it's certainly not meant to be perfect. It is just meant to be an exploration of the story, of you sort of getting things down so that you can, again, make it take the shape that it's going to. I will, again, say this mysterious middle grade book that I just finished, I got to a point that I was in the zone. I really wanted to go to where it was finished. And I genuinely kept forgetting what characters' names were. And I could have stopped and I could have gone back and reread what I had written so far to figure out, oh, the principal was named this, or oh, their friend is named this. But I didn't want to actually stop. I was so in the chapter that I was in. So I just put like principal name here in brackets, or I would say like friend A and friend B, because I knew that, and which is ultimately what happened. When I got to the end, I would go back, I'd reread it. As I was rereading it, I'd be like, oh, the friend's name was Joelle. And then when I got to that point where I was like, friend A, I would just type in that name. So again, you can let yourself be as messy as you want to be, as long as you make it to the end.
That's a good tip to stay in the zone.
Yeah.
We'll take a couple more questions because we're nearing the end. But I had another question. Now that you're finished with the mysterious disappearance, are you writing a book now? Like, do you have your hand dipped in another book?
Yeah, I mean, the book I just mentioned, again, was finished a week ago. So if you had asked me this question 2 weeks ago, I would have still been writing it. Now I'm recently finished, but I know that I will have to go back. So that was the big thing I was working on. I do have, this is where I'm going to get really mysterious. I do have a new collaboration with somebody else that is coming out strangely on my birthday in September 7th. They chose that date not knowing it was my birthday. But it hasn't been announced yet, so I can't say who it's with and I can't say what it's about, but I can tell you that I have a book coming out September 7th. And then after that, the book that I'm going to work on next is a book, we were talking about some books take a long amount of time. In my book, Two Boys Kissing, there are two characters, Ryan and Avery, who in that book go on their first 3 dates. And I've always wanted to write another book basically showing their first 10 dates. So every now and then I've been writing basically a chapter of the book, almost like a short story of like, this is their 6th date, this is their 7th date. And one of them appeared in my story collection, 19 Love Songs. It's called Snow Day. And so again, it's now been 5 years that I've been working on these boys' 10 dates, but I think they're about to get to dates 9 and 10. So I do want to finish that up. So that'll probably be the next thing I'm doing.
Awesome. Well, I'm gonna kind of close us out here since we've had such an incredible time doing our Q&A and listening to you. I thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Rakestraw, for for having this collaboration and allowing our students to experience you. Like I said in the beginning, this is a major fangirl moment, and had my email had a sound, I would have. So we really, really appreciate it. And it was great listening to your process and start to finish. So thank you for writing books that are lovely and inspirational and fabulous and draw us all in as readers. And I can't say enough fabulous things about your writing. So
well, thank you. And thank you for having me. And thank you everybody who asked a question. There were fantastic questions. And yeah, it's just been great to be here. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for coming. And thank you again, Michael. I rake straw. This has been fabulous. You
guys can hand in book orders. We have lots of signed copies of The Mysterious Disappearance of Aiden Ness. Awesome book. And we will be happy to sell them to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes.
So thanks for having us.
Push out with the link so everyone makes sure that they have well. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, students, for such great questions too. So everybody have a great day.